Picking the right class in Guild Wars 2 takes a whole bunch of time, and a lot of people, I feel, second guessed it. And I'll be the first one to admit that I was one of those people.
Now what?
I spent so much time looking at this screen here before I just went ahead and committed and actually started playing the game. And through trial by fire, trial by error, however you wish to look at it, I found the right class for me. But not without learning a couple of things along the way. So these are the 5 things that I wish I knew before I picked my class in Guild Wars 2. And as a disclaimer, I will stress this throughout this entire video, is play the class that catches your eye first. There's a bunch of different diverse builds and different playstyles that you'll be able to get into with this game. So pick the class that you think looks the most fun. If everyone tells you that Ranger and Necromancer are easier, but then you go ahead and look at the Mesmer and you say, you know what? I think that's the one. Go with your gut feeling. Only you know how you play, and that's what I would suggest to you. I would suggest that to everyone. So the first thing that I wish I knew before I got into picking my class for Guild Wars 2 was that first impressions and personal biases kind of got in my way. So when I first started playing Guild Wars 2, the very first character that I ever created was Fanatical Bearpaw, which is my Ranger. And I went with the Ranger, and I stuck with the Ranger for so long because I played a Hunter in World of Warcraft. And I think Ranger, Hunter, it kind of makes sense. You have a pet, you use a bow. You know, what am I missing here? That should be a one-to-one comparison, although it's not. See, what I think a lot of players try to do too much, and I say that you're doing too much, is that they try to compare something from one MMO or another game to what happens in Guild Wars 2. Like, for example, the Elementalist. If you play another game where you're a wizard or a mage that's throwing fireballs from a great distance, and then you try out the Elementalist, and it is nothing like that. The Elementalist plays more like a keyboard smashing pianist. But the point being is that a lot of players carry over this bias of what they liked in an old game or a different game that they would definitely like in this game. Now, it took me a lot of learning and took me a lot of picking up that actually I enjoy the Elementalist more than I like the Ranger. Personally, I find the Ranger to be a little bit boring. If you look at a lot of my content, I very seldomly will actually get in and play my Ranger, which is my original character. Have to get over that sense that your character playing in this game is going to be vastly different than what you play in a different game. So don't let that weigh too heavy on you when picking your class. The next bit building off of that was actually when I created my character and I went with a Norn Ranger. I had this idea that the Norns were specifically had better bonuses and better, we'll say, either damage or survivability, given the fact that they are towering hunters. They always talk about the hunt. You read the description, it says something about the hunt. Okay, cool, the Ranger, that's it. That's going to be a Norn Ranger. That's going to be the thing. Then come to find out that racial differences in this game really don't matter.
That's some bullshit.
I mean, of course, you can look at the different animations, how they look in certain gear. They do have racial skills that are specific to those races. However, having said that, those racial skills are very seldomly chosen over the class-specific skills. There's really no point. You should just pick the race that you think looks the coolest, honestly. Now, don't get me wrong, I like my Norn Ranger. I think it fits perfectly. I like the aesthetic. I really like how it looks when it's in combat. So that was a win in the long run. However, I had this thought before getting into the game that there was going to be heavy racial differences, very similar to what you would see in World of Warcraft. You might have picked a troll hunter over a blood elf hunter because the troll hunter had more damage output or had their haste ability that was a lot better suited than the arcane torrent that was coming from the blood elf. That doesn't exist in this game, and that was something that kind of held up my decision, because honestly, I might have gone with just a human ranger and called it a day. I know, I'm basic.
You're a basic bitch.
Another thing that really held me up for a bit, I will say, is of course going to be the roles in Guild Wars 2. Now, I carried over a lot of what I learned from World of Warcraft, and especially in the raiding and dungeon community, that you were supposed to have a tank, a healer, and some DPS. And if you were in a raid, for example, a 10-man raid, 2 tanks, 2 to 3 healers, and the rest are DPS. That was the mentality that I had. I thought it was very similar in Guild Wars 2. I didn't do any research jumping into this game. I said, that's what it's going to be. You're going to need to have those roles. So let me pick a ranger because I'm going to be a DPSer. That's going to be my thing. That's what my focus is going to be. Only to come to find out that there really isn't a true, we'll say, holy trinity. Now, before everyone jumps into the comments who have played Guild Wars 2 and do like the raiding and the strike missions, there is some loosely defined roles, but they're either support or DPS, or in this sense, kind of like a subsection of a mix of both. So boon support DPS. So the supports in Guild Wars 2 are usually about healing or providing some crazy buff. The boon support DPS are DPSers that provide some really good buffs for the entire group. And then the pure DPS are exactly that, damage per second. There you go. And typically the bosses will attack the target that has the highest toughness, which a lot of the times ends up being the supports who end up having the most toughness, toughness being the value that reduces strike damage that occur with every strike. But I didn't know all of that. So when I was picking my class, when I was picking the ranger, I thought I was just going to be straight DPS. The ranger is going to be straight DPS, and that was going to be, it makes sense. You use a bow, you have a pet to attack, not really a tank, you know, not really any supportive capabilities. And then I unlocked the druid, and I was very surprised that you can in fact provide some really good buffs, some really good healing, and that was a viable option. And I guess that's what caught me off guard, especially when I was picking my class. I had selected it and then I unlocked everything and I said, oh, I actually can do more than just DPS.
I'm a paladin with 18 charisma and 97 hit points.
All I'll say is that in this game, most classes has either an elite specialization or a couple of trait choices that allow them to either play the DPS or play some type of supporting class. They can either provide these powerful boons, they can heal or DPS. Just about every class has a subsection that can apply these things. So just know that when you're picking your class, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be able to do some type of different roles in endgame content. It isn't just going to be isolated for DPS. It isn't just going to be isolated for support. They can mix and match and still be effective. Another thing that really caught me, specifically with my ranger, was the fact of the weapon diversity.
Why did you throw me gloves? To catch these hands!
So weapons in Guild Wars 2 each have their own unique skills. So when you pick up a longbow, it has different skills than what you would get with a short bow. So the short bow is more condition damage oriented, whereas the longbow is more strike damage. I didn't realize at that point that I wasn't just going to be pigeonholed into the longbow. I actually could swap weapons within combat, as well as being viable in most content using some of the weapons that the ranger could use. So it was very shocking when I got a major upgrade for a great sword and I was in melee swinging that sword around. I was not expecting that. I was under the mindset that, and again, I bring this back from World of Warcraft, that if you were a specific spec in the game, that's typically the loot that you would get. Okay, so you're playing a marksmanship hunter, you're only going to get ranged weapons, crossbows, rifles, bows, and those are going to be the things that you can actually use. You won't get loot for anything else unless you opt in for it. And here in Guild Wars 2, that kind of caught me off guard, especially because that was something that I really wish I knew, is because I thought Ranger is only going to use the longbow, and it can use a number of different weapons. Probably the coolest one being the double axe. I think that's a great, like, aesthetic. You're a mountain man kind of thing. It was cool. All I will say about this is that don't put too much effort into the idea of what your weapon class should be, because it could change very, very frequently. I've actually just been playing the staff catalyst and having a ton of fun. Boring. But now I can use the sword. I can go back and use my hammer if I want to. So there's a bunch of different viable options. Just don't put too much stress into it. Which kind of leads me into my last point, which is, honestly, don't put too much time into it.
Talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail.
The idea that we pick our classes and that is essentially our identity in an MMORPG is one of the best things about MMOs, is that you get to live out your life in a virtual world as a new character or as someone who can summon, you know, holy light or smash bricks or be able to shoot this huge longbow. We live out those aesthetics in our lives in these games. Now, what I will say about that though is the fact that leveling in Guild Wars 2 and having a bunch of alts is actually something very common. Most players have upwards of, you know, 5, 6, 7, all the way I've heard of players having up to like 70 alts all on the same account, and they all play them and they log on and they do their thing. The idea behind it is the fact that Guild Wars 2 does a really good job about not making it too difficult for you to try different things, different specs, different classes, and bouncing back and forth between them. And in Guild Wars 2, the horizontal progression really makes it easy that once your character earns that piece of gear, they're good to go. And honestly, you can purchase a lot of really good exotic gear that are essentially some of the highest stat values in the game for fairly cheap.
How cheap? Cheap as hell?
Especially with some of the named exotics that you can buy off the trading post. You can basically get a whole set of berserkers for the medium armor set for like 1 gold. And then you're good. And then your thief can do all the berserk damage that he needs to. So the idea that you would get locked into one particular class and that is the only class that you have to play, I just want to stress is, you know, don't do that. It is so easy to bounce back and forth between the classes here in Guild Wars 2 that it's something that I actually recommend because it'll make you a better, well-rounded player, but I think it'll also make you enjoy the game a little bit more by looking at it from a different perspective. So don't put too much time into it. Don't stress about it. Give a character a shot. Hey, if you're level 2, you can go to the Heart of the Mists and then try the class out with its full kit unlocked and see if it's something that you might even like, so you don't have to waste your time. I mean, there's ways to get around it, but just keep that in mind. Don't stress about it. And of course, this always leads into my extra point, which is pick the class that you think you are going to enjoy the most in Guild Wars 2. The class that you pick is the lens in which you view the game. So make sure that you're looking through it with a a pretty good lens. If you want to see a brief overlook of all 9 core classes, check out this video here, which is going to cover them all in a very fast amount of time. Aside from that, stay caffeinated, folks.